everybody, and welcome to Bits of Board, where we're talking board games, miniatures, cards, and dice. My name's Michael, and today we're going to be checking out Anachrony. Now, I've already done the unboxing for this one, so this isn't going to be one of those videos. This is more of a, let's find out what Anachrony is all about kind of videos. Now, Anachrony is set in a post-apocalyptic world where players take on the role of the remnants of humanity. Each player will take on a different faction, and each faction has their own different beliefs, which lead them a little bit to clash, but they exist peacefully, barely. The leaders of all the factions meet at the World Council, and there they discuss and plan out the future of humanity. Unfortunately for them, due to the nature of time travel, they've been warned of another impending disaster that is due to wipe them all clear. But each faction has their own agenda, and they want to take the World Council as their own. So players will spend the game trying to build up reputation, to build up their resources, to get their people prepared to evacuate their area and take the capital as the one true leader of all humanity. Players will be researching, building, and hiring workers ranging from admin officers to engineers to scientists to geniuses that can do anything. Players will use some of the most advanced technologies to get them closer to their goals, including the super projects, the crowning achievements of the scientific world, and the exosuits, which are like mechs that take on the wasteland and allow players to go into some of the more dangerous areas out there. Yes, it's a worker placement, resource management, victory points kind of game, but it has got so much more going on for it. We've got time travel, we've got post-apocalypse, end of the world stuff. We've got 4 completely different factions, so many different ways to play this game. So, we're going to be checking out the basic version of the game, and then we're going to have a chat about what the additional modules bring to the game and how it changes up. So let's get stuck in. Alright guys, here is the main board setup, and as you can see, things are crazy on this board. Up the top, we've got our variable endgame scoring cards, so these change the way that the game scores at the end of the game. We've got our worker placement board, complete with some resources scattered around. We've got some worker placement options throughout. Over here we've got some decks that allow us to populate the mining field as well as the recruits. We've got some buildings over here which are for the construction actions over here. Ooh, so much going on. Down the bottom here we've got our timeline. Now this is where we keep track of all of the time events that are occurring. Anytime a player requests resources from their future self, you mark it down here so that you can repay the debt later on, and it's definitely a really good idea to do that. Otherwise you get anomalies, which are these, and they take up spaces on your player boards, give you negative points come the end of the game, and they're pretty difficult to get rid of as well. Just on top of the timeline here we've got our super project cards. Each round we reveal a new one of these to be purchased, and all the way up to the 4th round here, when great disaster happens, an asteroid hits and we change the face of the game board, we flip this thing over, allowing us to take the evacuation action. Now, players can only take the evacuation action once they've met their personal evacuation conditions. Man, so much going on here, but plenty of board for plenty of gameplay. Then players have got to decide which side of their path board they want to use, which change the way that they can finish the game. So down here we've got our evacuation conditions, and that changes from side to side. So there's the players can choose whichever side they want on that. There's not too much going on there. We've also got our leaders, which offer a variable player power as well, so that's always good to keep things fresh. Now underneath the leader card there is a list of starting resources that players get, including power cores, which can be used to power up additional mechs, a little bit of water, which you can use throughout the game, as well as a couple of other resources as well. Here they are. Oh. And of course some workers. So we've got a couple of workers here. Now according to this, we have one sleepy worker. This is a tired worker. You can't use them, you can't use your workers while they're in the tired column here. We also have a couple of active workers, which are good to go. We have 3 scientists for the Path of Salvation here, and 1 engineer. That means the first turn of the game, unless they do some rallying or get the tired workers going, I'll probably only start with these. Players will also have a counter for their morale track. as well as their time travel track. The morale track, that basically says how your workers are feeling. So the higher this is on the track, the more victory points you'll get at the end of the game. The lower, the less happy they are, the less victory points that you'll get. The time travel track, every time you complete a full cycle of time travel stuff, so that's requesting something from the future and then actually sending it back to them, this goes up a notch as well. So the higher you are, the better you are at time travel, the more victory points you're going to be getting. Players will also get a bunch of warp tiles, which they can use to request resources from the future, as well as a bunch of path markers as well. Now the path markers, one of those initially goes out to show the player's focus on the timeline, so I'll bump that up there. But the rest of these can sort of show once you've used a special action. So for example, these two actions here, one requires a worker, this one doesn't. If I was to use this action, I would place my path marker over that to show that I've used it. Each player will also score 6 mechs that they can power up throughout the game, so they can send their workers into the main player board. That being said, let's go check out some of the worker actions on that board. Now, the cool thing about the worker placement in this game is that each individual location will react differently depending on which worker you send to it. So, going through all the actions, we've got our water purification tower over here. You get bonus water if you use a scientist. Down here with the trade with the nomads, everything works out for everybody, except if you use an administrator, you get to take the action twice. Over in the research section here, you can only actually send scientists. Anyone else won't actually work unless you send a genius. Geniuses will work. We've got our recruit section here. You can't send scientists to this location. If you send an engineer, you can't take a genius. And everything works out if you take an administrator. So they're the only guys that have access to hiring a genius. We've got our construct action over here. You can send a scientist. You can't send administrators. And if you send an engineer, it actually reduces the cost of the purchase, which is very cool. We've also got the mines over here, which allow us to take a couple of the resources available on the board. Scientists and administration officers can go, but if you send an engineer, once they're finished, they actually come back active. So they're not tired after doing that, which means you can constantly send someone over. The last initial placement location is the World Council up here. Now this comes in handy, especially if a location that you want to use has been filled up by other players, or if you just want to use something again. So if these locations are filled, you can send someone to the World Council to take the action as normal. It costs a little bit, and if you want to spend a little bit more, you get the first player token as well. Catch is you can only use these once a location is full. So you can't just go straight away for that first player token. Now locations with a thick white border like these ones here, you can only place one worker on those at a time. But these ones over here and our evacuation location, because they don't have that border, you can place as many workers as you want on those locations. Now there are 6 rounds in the game, the first being the preparation phase, where you sort of prepare the player board for the next round. Easy enough. Then we've got the paradox phase, which is where these warp tiles and the timeline come into play. Now in the paradox phase, players will have a look at the timeline and find out who has the most warp tiles on each location. The player with the most on each location has to roll the paradox die. So we've got the green player over here. He has 2 warp tiles in there. Everyone else just has 1. So he has to roll the dice. The number of symbols on the dice say how many paradox tokens he gets. Over here, red and green both have a single warp tile, so they both have to roll. Red gets 1. Green, he gets another one. Uh-oh. Finally, red and blue have 1 each over here as well. Red gaining another one, and blue gaining 1 as well. There is an option to get 2 on here or none. They do pop up occasionally, but as you can see, it's mainly just the ones. Now, paradox tokens suck because every time you get 3 of these, you do get to discard them, which is good, but you get an anomaly. Now, these anomalies will take a space on your player board in one of the building sections. These will give you negative points, -3 points at the end of the game, and are actually pretty difficult to get rid of. You either have to spend 2 basic resources or 1 neutronium and 2 water, and send one of your workers to their death to actually get rid of these. So these are bad, but you know, time travel is good, but anomalies are bad. Next, we've got the power-up phase. This is where players will decide how many mechs they want to power up and send out onto the main board. Now, the first 3 that you want to put out, they don't cost anything, but any additional ones that you do put out, they cost one of these energy cores. Now, sometimes it's not a good idea to put all your workers out because for every space that you have left free on your board, you actually get a water resource for that. So let's say this first turn, I only want to send 2 workers out. I'm going to get 4 water out of that for free. That's 5, that's too many. Cool. Next, we've got the warp phase. Now, this is where we can place out our warp tiles to gain resources from. So players will look at their available warp tiles, the ones that they haven't spent yet, and say, all right, this turn I think I'm going to need an administrator and some more water. So they can put up to 2 of those out onto the timeline, gaining those resources for free. Then we've got our action round where players will power up their mechs. If a player has a couple of buildings already in their base, they can use those workers straight into each location there without actually having to power up a suit. And then once every player has passed, we move on to the cleanup phase. Now, the cleanup phase is pretty important. On the main board, that means we refresh our resources and our recruits, but it's also when we retrieve our workers. So in a lot of cases, our workers will come back tired. There's only a couple of spaces out on the main board that allow the worker to come back and still active. So we bring these guys back like this. Let's say you're still there, boom, move you back. Let's say you did something cool and you're tired as well. Awesome. Now this is a best case example. We have 1 worker left over in the active column and a bunch of tired workers here. So when it comes time to do our worker placement for the next action, we can actually take our worker, chuck it on this little refresh icon here, and if we can pay the amount of water that's underneath our marker here, we can bump this up a notch and take all of our tired workers and bring them back to the active side. Now, what if we accidentally or, meaningfully sent all of our workers out last turn? They all came back tired. What do we do? Well, that's when we have to use our force workers tile here. We take one of our path markers, place it over there to show that we've used it, and then we bring all of our workers over, no worries. We don't have to pay anything, except we have to drop our tracker down here by 1 notch, which can slowly lower us into some negative victory points. Now, after the 4th round, disaster hits, that asteroid just goes and blows everything up. On your player board, this means you're going to have less access to your mechs. Players will place these special tiles over any location that has the asteroid marker on it, and then they've just got to deal with the consequences. On the main board, you saw that we unlock the evacuation worker placement place, but we also supercharge some of the other worker placement locations. So for each of our capital locations down here, we take a small pile of these hexes, 1 pile for each location, and we flip them over onto it. Some for construction and some more for recruit. Now these are great because they give so much extra oomph to the ability. The catch is though, if you use one, you have to flip it over and that placement location is no longer available. This creates a sort of a race vibe. It's a race for the best powers so that you can meet your evacuation requirements. The last change is that after the disaster, the first placed resource in this particular pile is always going to be neutronium, and that just injects a little bit more of that into the game. Alrighty, so that's the basic version of the game there, but like I said earlier, Anachrony comes with a bunch of different modules that you can use to change the game up to keep things fresh. Now I think with the standard version of the game, you'll only get the Doomsday module and the Chronobot, that's the solo mode thing. But the Kickstarter exclusive edition gives us 2 more. We've got the Pioneers of New Earth and the Guardians of the Council modules as well. Now we're going to start off by having a chat about the Doomsday module. So this changes the game up a little bit, giving players a way to influence the time of impact. That means they can either bring the impact time closer to the beginning of the game or completely get rid of it. Now this ties in with the different factions in that some factions, they want to save the world. They don't want the impact at all, but some of them, they see the impact and the end of days a way to sort of start fresh, to start anew. So players are going to be having this little tug of war thing that every check for impact round, players have the opportunity to move the impact tile closer or further away. So this altered timeline is really going to reward players who have flexible game plans in play and that can react and adjust to the different timelines that happen. All in all, I think this is a very interesting addition. It's very thematic and it allows players to create their own story on the table, which I'm all for. So I've also got the Chronobot, which is the solo mode for play. He's a beast. He's very OP and he's got an almost unlimited set of actions in his disposal. The bot is going to be collecting workers and collecting resources, and every time he gets a set for them, bang, he's going to get points. So this guy is going to get points so often. So gameplay is really going to reward a player that can adapt, that can block, that can do pretty much everything that a robot player can't, I guess. Very, very challenging, and it's a really great way for players to come to understanding the importance of the timeline and requesting those future resources because you're not going to be able to get on top of him without them. Next up, we've got the Pioneers of New Earth module, where players can now upgrade their mechs, their exosuits, and send them out on adventure. Now, adventure is a new action where players are going to incorporate a sort of a risk versus reward thing. They're going to weigh up, how upgraded are the mechs? How difficult is the wasteland out there? And they're going to draw a card, and hopefully if they're powerful enough and luck's a little bit on their side, they gain these new powers. Now, some of the powers are one-off, some of them are with the player throughout the game, others provide new action spaces that players can take. But all of this adds a completely new path for players to take through the game. They can specialize in adventure, scoring some of the crazy bonuses that you can get out there in an effort to save their people. Awesomely thematic. The art on the cards are very evocative of adventure, of danger and that sort of thing. And it really just works with the theme. Of course, players are going to want to get out into the wasteland to see what they can find from the old world. Now, this module doesn't mix too well with the previous two modules. You can't play it with the solo mode and they don't want you to play it with the Doomsday module, but it does play nicely with the Guardians of the Council module coming up next. So let's check that out. The Guardians of the Council adds a new layer to the story where players are actually going to receive help from an alternate timeline where the city is just destined to be destroyed kind of thing. So they've sent back some mechs to our timeline where we might be able to use them to our advantage. It allows players to send off their workers to permanently pilot these new mechs. Now, when it comes down to worker placement, these guys are treated as geniuses. So very, very powerful on the board there. And players can use them to, in the same way that they would use any workers, except that if a capital action is fully booked up, they can still take it using their special powers. It does allow players to have a bit more fun with the mechs out there, and it does add a fairly nice little bit of story to it. Maybe not as exciting as the adventure side of things, but still a worthy addition indeed. Now, in addition to these modules, the game actually includes a couple of other variations just on the base game. There's an alternate timeline thing where players are potentially going to get some bonuses every time they play their warp tiles. There is the off chance that they'll actually get some negative effects out of it as well. It's just the nature of the beast. But it's something that's really going to influence the way that players actually get their warp tiles into play. A neat little addition. It's definitely not a necessary change for the game, but it's there to spice it up if you need a change. There's also the starting assets draft, as well as the end game victory points draft as well, where players are going to have a little bit more control over what they get in their hands at the beginning of the game and over what they're going to score points for at the end of the game. Alright, so Anachrony is an absolute beast of a game. There is so much going on. The first time I picked up the rulebook and had a read, I was like, what? Setup for this game the first time around took ages. I had no idea what was going on. That being said, with all that it has in the game, it delivers on everything that it promised in the Kickstarter. It gives us an ambitious worker placement game with time travel that works. It is thematic, it's an awesome gameplay mechanic, and it works. I think the first couple of times that you play this game, you're probably not going to realize the importance of that warping in resources thing. You go a little bit light on it in the early game, and then by the time that if you're playing against the solo bot like the Chrono bot, or if you're playing against someone who's pretty good at the game, you're going to get thrashed without that initial reliance on the warp tokens and careful balance. And I think that plays to this game's strengths, because after all, this is a game about time travel, and if you forget about it, you're going to suck at it. And I think that's just the nature of the game. This is not your standard worker placement game at all. Right, so let's do the pros and cons thing. We'll start with the cons because there's not too many of them, and then we can get to the good stuff after. I'm going to come right out and say it. This game is fiddly as hell. So many different pieces, decks to choose from, setup time is just blah. And it kind of takes away from it just that little bit, because there is this looming, oh man, do I have to set this game up to actually enjoy it? Because man, there is well, we'll get to that. But a game with this many components and this many requirements for setup needs to be streamlined. And I'm sure they could have done that. I mean, a game like A Feast for Odin, it's got trays and trays of bits, but the point is with that, they gave us the trays to make it so much easier. If the Anachrony box came with a nice way, just a couple of inserts that you could pull out, and there are your piles, it would work. And that's what I've done ultimately. I've had to buy some tackle boxes, and it's working for me now. The first time I pulled it out, man, it was a hassle. And, that's just the nature of the beast and our board gaming hobby, I guess. It requires a little bit of customization to get the full amount of enjoyment out of it. But there is a lot of enjoyment in the box. If you can get past the fiddliness of it, the stupid setup time, then there is a game behind this that is going to leave so many other worker placement games in its dust. This game has story. The guys at Mind Clash came up with an entire backstory for each of the factions, for that whole world. And then the gameplay, it just resolves the story. This is what happens in this iteration of it. And that is cool. There aren't too many worker placement games that are this thematic. Some of them are just dry and they work, they're fun because the gameplay is good. But this has it all. This has the story, this has the backstory, this has meaningful decisions throughout the game that relate to the story so that you can have your own version on the table. The components are really good. I know I got the upgraded minis and stuff, but even without them, with those hexes for the workers, for the mechs, it works. It doesn't detract from the game. I said during the unboxing that I don't think I'd ever not use the minis. And I still kind of stand by that, but there is a lot less hassle in just having a little pile of chits to play around with. So yeah, there is that. They are kind of there for a purpose. Actually, a teensy-weensy negative with the resource tokens, the 3D, the cubes. A couple of the colors in the wrong light. They're a little bit hard to distinguish, and that shouldn't be an issue with this sort of stuff. Luckily, we've got the cardboard chits if that ever becomes like a deal breaker for anyone, but I think it's just because they use those real clear plastic ones. I mean, like, if we look at them, I don't know if this is going to work, but you can they're too see-through for it to make a real difference. I think it's the top two there that look just way too similar when you put them on the table. Yeah, on the sides and stuff, like, you can probably make them out. I don't know. Anyway, that's a small issue. I don't really care, but should be noted anyway. The rest of the components are great. The cardboard is thick, it's lush, the board itself is amazing. The colors work and all that stuff. It's great, it's fine, it's wonderful. What else? They've just packed so much game into this box. Even if you didn't get the Pioneers and Guardians extra modules, there is so much variability in the setup of this game, in the player powers. It's got so much life in it, in just the base game. And then throw in those extra modules and then you're set for life, kind of thing. Mind Clash have done an excellent job putting this together. From their Kickstarter, going above and beyond with their production, with their inclusion of gameplay and stuff. They've just done a wonderful job, as they do. With Trickerion coming out beforehand, Anachrony can follow with its head held high. It follows suit in regards to an incredibly deep worker placement game with theme, with oodles and oodles of theme, and it just works. If you haven't had a chance to check this game out, do it. If you can find a copy, especially with the minis and the bonus modules, go get it because it is so worthwhile to have in the collection. Yeah, it's a pretty heavy Euro game. It's not probably the hardest thing in the world to play. It's probably pretty difficult to wrap your mind around it at the beginning, but once you understand that it's a worker placement game, there are a finite number of places that you can put your workers, that's when the game starts to come together. It's definitely a winner in my books. Even with the setup time and the fiddliness, this game pulls through head and shoulders above for whatever else is out right now. Put it on your wish list, guys. That is Anachrony. Keep it up, Mind Clash. I mean, you guys keep doing what you do because there is no one else out there that does games like you. Well done. Thank you all very much for watching. If you've got any questions, comments, whatever, chuck it down in the comments below. But as always, my name's Michael. This is Bits Aboard. We'll catch you next time.